You're tuned into RX Radio. Movement prescribed. Brought to you by Prescript.com. A personalized approach to keeping you healthy and making your best even better. Your hosts, Dr. Jordan Shallow and Dr. Jordan Ginta.
Have you ever been so stressed that you, hi, by the way, welcome. Let's do the intro as part of the episode rather than some sort of addition at the end sort of thing. So welcome back to another episode of RX Radio. I am joined for the first time in probably a month, I think. It's been a minute.
I have no idea what the timeline is on these actual things, but it's been a minute. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking business, as it were, on our weekly catch-up times. So join with me as per most of the time since the beginning, Dr. Jordan Ginta. I realized that never up until very recently we started actually putting our names in the intro, because I think they're in the actual Lundy guitar riff intro.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So today we are going to talk about first principles and fundamentals of coaching. I feel like a lot of people want to get into training and coaching, but don't really know where to start. I think the biggest issue that I see is people going specific out of the gate, like trying to go hyper specific out of the gate without building a base knowledge that would help. Like me and you joke that we kind of just know one thing, the weightlifting thing really well, but we could probably riff on physiology and biochemistry at a decently high level just with our background, right? Because we've gone from generalist to specific. And some degree with clinical practice always keeps you as a generalist. But it's something that I see lately, especially with, I think, the differentiation or the need for differentiation through social media, right? Like everyone's trying to come up with a new shtick, whether we do reels, fitness reels, not a thing. Just not useful for literally anyone involved. I just can't get on board with I'm going to put my finger here and put a little text box and another one here. Please, for the love of God, stop ruining the thing I love. But I feel like people they want to go specific because they think it is going to be easier to garner a following and an audience out of the gate. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. If I'm a new coach and I come to you, Jay, I want to become a coach in the fitness industry, what's your first advice?
My first advice, someone that's never coached before and they want to be a coach?
Like a 16-year-old kid, maybe he's earmarked for a kin degree. He's still trying to figure it out. He likes lifting weights. Maybe he's half decent at a sport. I'm basically describing me and you at 16. But it's we ain't gonna make it, as they say. I'm trying to think, because I always hate the question, if you go back and tell your former self some advice, what would it be? It's I'm pretty cool, where I'm at. So I don't know, don't mix beer and wine. I don't really know what to tell my former self. But if I were to think okay, a kid coming up, 16, maybe 18, a little closer to undergrad, and he's I want to do what you do. What would you tell them, just from just an education standpoint?
Just fucking run. No.
Right.
But no, I mean, to get to the position that I've gotten in, I've gone down a lot of roads that didn't necessarily pan out. So, I mean, my biggest, I guess, my biggest piece of advice that I could, apply to most cases would be do the thing that you want to do. Just start fucking doing it. Because I didn't get to where I'm at by just, looking at people weightlifting online or learning about weightlifting from a book or, watching the CrossFit games or thinking about going to the gym. It's, we joke about it all the time. Is my first kind of competitive iteration of lifting weights was my brief stint as a bodybuilder. Yeah. I literally shaved my ass and painted my taint. Shout out Shane Stark. I stood as best man in his wedding. He painted my taint with a sponge brush with this copper color fake tan on the morning of my only bodybuilding show. So my advice,
I will never know.
Yeah. my advice is you get you a Shane Stark that will paint your taint. Second to that is it's just, I don't even fucking know.
Sorry,
Let's just restart.
No two words go together quite as good as paint and taint. That's the English language giving you a gift.
How have we gone like 180 episodes and we haven't put those two words together yet?
That's actually, I think we've had to like consciously try to not put it. Don't say it. But dude, like, you know what, man? Like that's it. Like I've been around bodybuilding since I started, right? That was like the muscular development magazines, the Flex magazines, like bodybuilding.com back when it was like the shit. And it's like there's nothing that says you're willing to overcome, outside opinion, like entering into that. Because you got to realize, even too, man, like when you did that, people don't realize or don't see how quickly the social media machine has really driven normalcy, like has driven people's acceptance of what otherwise would be considered fringe and abnormal behavior, because you can silo to such a specific degree what you see and you inundate yourself with, and you can enter only into a community of people that accept what you're doing without question, just unflappable like support. But back then, man, like, like I've gone through the red, white, and junta IG days. Like you weren't doing it for the gram, man. And like, honestly, that's so different, because even like, I just think of like, I remember watching this episode once about the Simpsons going into the future. And I forget the total, like, the whole corpus of the story, but they were playing a riff on Fox and how it was like gradually becoming like very like kind of desensitized, and like they were just basically watching porn on Fox, and they're like, wow, like Fox turned into softcore porn so gradually I didn't even realize it. I feel like go on, do a quick scroll of your IG right now and see how many taints you're seeing, right? Like, but so now all of a sudden bodybuilding is like, wow, that guy has more clothes on than most chicks on Instagram, right? So like if there's anyone to be like about that idea of like, look, just fucking do it regardless, and like devoid of any fear of judgment, it's the guy who had the homie paint the taint and go fucking hit the back double bicep. But like, man, you know what, I know guys who are like probably competitive at a national level, who are a part of a community that's totally accepting, that cannot get over that fear to do that. Mm-hmm. And you're just like, I like lifting weights and I'm going to do it. Fuck it.
Absolutely. And that kind of even takes it a step back, is that it doesn't necessarily never came from the idea that like, I want to be this guy that like cracks backs in the corner of a gym. It stems from passion and love for the things that I do. It's, first off, I fell in love with strength training, really. I got into strength training from wrestling, which I always liked wrestling. I was pretty good at it. I had an affinity for it, but I didn't love it. If I loved it, I'd still be doing it to this day. But the second I set foot in the gym, I remember the first time I hit like a real, like, it was like with my friend's dad, who was like, the friend was like the fucking All-American state champion, went D1, got full ride for wrestling. I remember when just, through associations I made and friendships and stuff, I got like into the clique and I got to do their weight training exercise with him. And like, it was like a select few. There's like 5 of us. Shane was actually one of them at one point. So the homie. But the thing is, with that, the first workout I did with them, I remember going home, my hands hurt so fucking bad, I could barely open the door to get back into the house. Just my fucking hands. I was so sore for like a fucking week, but I'm like, this is it. Like, I fucking love this. And then from that moment on, like, I'm in a gym 6-7 days a week. Like, I haven't left the gym since. So it's really everything that I have or that I've done to this point has kind of spiraled from realistically that moment, which was probably in the making my entire life. I was like worked out with my dad and like we had a home gym and stuff, but it's that passion, that love for this one specific thing that I have refused to let go of my entire life, that everything else has spiraled from and stemmed from.
Because like, I think for me, and when we started school, like you were getting into CrossFit, like did you ever think that your main chick would be Olympic weightlifting?
I
Like,
mean,
did you
no.
ever think that you would push? Because I mean, when you were into CrossFit, like that was it. You were always a good like technical lifter, or became a really good technical lifter just through CrossFit. But like, did you ever think for a second, at least me on the outside looking in, like your transition into Ollie lifting was gradual. But when I first met you, if you were like, oh, this guy's gonna like splinter off into just Ollie, like, I don't know, like he's kind of like really good at a lot of the CrossFit stuff. So I really think he's just in CrossFit alone. Like, but I think like you said earlier, the process, like being maybe more process driven to put a finer point on it, not only leads you down roads where like you get that itch scratched, but also down roads where like you're definitely sure that this is a border and a boundary. Like I think that's where people like they walk aimlessly, just kind of in circles, metaphorically speaking, because they're not willing to just go in a certain direction for a length of time to hit something that might be a border. Like, no, like this isn't it. And then you kind of like ambulate back and you end up like hitting another one, like, oh, this is it. And like, I think a lot of the time, like in the process, and to double back to the original question about like, what do you tell someone who's trying to get into coaching? It's like, stick to something, like stick to anything. Because if you get to a point where you don't want to stick to it anymore, then stick to something else. And then you'll bounce off so many walls that you'll be right dead center in the place where you need to be, right? But everyone's so afraid to go out and like invest time that they end up just sitting there with this paralysis by analysis and they don't do anything. Like, how many people come to me now? Like, look, dude, people, you get tagged in shit and I get tagged in shit as educators. Do you know how much that cheeses our professors? Right? Hilarious. Like me and you, like you telling Scuderi you're gonna punch him in the pussy, and then we go off and play pool. True story. True story. This might not make the edit. But it's like I don't think we were great. No, let me reframe. We were terrible students.
Yeah.
We were probably, honestly, we were the worst students to pass our class. Like I could say that unequivocally. Like I remember doing the tassel thing on stage with you, just going like, but like now, because all I did was like, all right, like we're just gonna keep walking in this direction until we hit something. And it's like, so far it's been going great, right? And now that's where we start to get people who ask us for this advice. Like, I'm new, where do I start? And it's like, you start at the start line. Like there's nowhere else to start. Like you just need to go, right? And I think people, because they don't have necessarily like a target, that cripples them and able to like take a step. Like they feel like every direction they step in is going to be, they're going to miss something and they're going to be wrong. I'm wrong so often. Like it's incredible how wrong I am all the time. But it's like I used to be way more wrong, way more often. Then I was like, oh fuck, that was a mistake, and then I stopped doing that thing. And then like you almost get to a point where it's like, okay, how can I be wrong? Like what are the outer borders of like whether I'm wrong about an assumption about something that I want to do with a particular direction? Like there's podcasts we've done we haven't released. There's courses we've talked about that we haven't released. There's programs we've done we haven't released. Not because we couldn't, not because we shouldn't, is because as we did it, we were like, okay, this is clearly marking a jurisdiction for us. It's like, this doesn't feel real. This doesn't scratch the itch. So that's kind of how we make decisions. And it's like for collaborations and business stuff, it's like our whole decision-making process is like, do I fuck with this? Yeah, we fuck with this. All right, let's do it. And then it's all in, right? Like that was like the level one. Like I still remember texting Clem or messaging Clem about the level 1 program, the Prescript level 1 course. And it was, I want to say it was like mid-August. I was somewhere, I don't know. I was on like one of my vacations or whatever the fuck I was doing. I was gallivanting around somewhere. And I was like, you know what? I think this would be cool. Like we did a lot of stuff for Good Life. We were developing curriculum for Ultimate Performance. But we got a lot of interest through social. The people like, oh, I can't make it, or can I attend if I'm not a Good Life employee? I'm like, all right, let's just see what we can put together. And basically it was like, all right, what do I think people should know getting their foot in the door as not even just a generalist, but even some specialists that may have gone past the general route. Like, what do I think is the base level of understanding? And the thing is like, it's not base. Right now, the base level of understanding is like, upper push, horizontal row, overhead push, overhead pull. Like, so like, all right, let's see if we can up the game a little bit. And I basically just wrote till that feeling was met, where I started to write and go, oh, okay, I don't really fuck with this. Okay, like this course teaches that's not, I don't really fuck with that. And then by the end of it, I was just like, all right, this is 16 weeks of shit that I think is everything that captures sort of the ethos of how we think about resistance training. And it's like, from this position, this is your starting line, right? I think a lot of people, if they don't start anywhere, they just start specific. Like, to me, specificity, and this is a quote from a dude named Nassim Taleb, I've talked about it a few times on the podcast. He's like this philosopher, economist guy. He says specialties for insects. And I was like, oh, like that kind of makes sense. And even to what degree me and you kind of have a foothold in weightlifting and like maybe more of the powerlifting community specifically, someone can still walk in our office or your office from like Gen Pop and you still be able to hit it out of the park, right? So I think like when start in trying to figure out what you don't know and just start walking. Because I think people are like, oh, should I take this sprinting course? It's like, should I take this? Should I go to Chiro school? Should I go to PT school? Like, these are questions I field all the time. And it's like, dude, like, that's not really a question I can answer. Like, my advice would be to like, just start moving in a direction, right? Whether it's, bodybuilding and painting and, or what have you, or just fucking crack a book, like read Supple Leopard, read some articles, trying to see who you fuck with. Because it's so hard, like, because you want to give specific advice, but at the same time, like there's not enough time in the day to do it. So it's like you need to give like a meta advice that actually hopefully guides someone down the right path. And the path is theirs to sort of choose.
Yeah, dude, I absolutely agree. And I like that idea of kind of running out one route until you find the boundary, because that's all my life has been. That's all, even Prescript, dude. We never thought we were going to end up here, but we just ran out. We found those boundaries and bounced off them and found something new. Like what I'm thinking of, what came to my mind as you're saying that is like, have you ever met someone and you ask them what they do and they say they're an artist? Like, it doesn't, which is weird to me. It doesn't compute in my brain how someone can be an artist and pay for groceries and buy a house. And like, how do you make a living being an artist? And if you go down this route, this thing that you're passionate about as far as you can to the nth degree, you're going to find what you need to do to be successful in it. So someone that, they want to be an artist, they're going to find a way to make it happen where they're going to make this passion something that they can make that's sustainable and fulfilling, as opposed to just kind of selling out and going to be an accountant or something like that. So it's like, that's kind of how I think about this. It's like, maybe a little less abstract. I mean, to me, that it still doesn't make any fucking sense how an artist, pays for groceries. I don't know. I don't get it. But at the same time, like, it probably doesn't make any sense to that artist. Like, how does this guy just like kind of work out all day and like talk on the internet and like, buy groceries? But we've just wedged ourselves into this position where we've found what we're good at, and we're just kind of targeting that area, and we're just putting a full effort into growing this thing and cultivating this thing that, thankfully, because of the internet, is now something that, is larger than us.
Yeah. And that's, I think, when that is, I don't want to say when that's your end goal, but if that's ever on the table, then you have an obligation to stick around. And I think a lot of it comes down to like just commitment issues, man. Like I fuck, dude, how many kids that we went to school with that either didn't finish or aren't practicing now?
Yeah.
It's just like
most.
Yeah, man. Yeah, honestly. Well, they tell you that first day, man. I still remember you walked in. I remember specifically the room we were in. It was the one on the side of the building with windows, and that overlooked, like, I guess it would be the west parking lot. And I was sizing up everybody. I got in early because they had the Canadian students in first, and then they were filing in the rest of you guys because we had some meeting with the Montier. And I remember sizing up. I was like, I better be the biggest fucking guy in this class. And I saw you and Tyler Dickinson, and I was just like, all right, motherfuckers, I get my eye on you. And I think like you were the first two. I think within a week, the three of us were training together at Gold's in Santa Clara. But yeah, it's just, I don't know, man. Like, I think people are so crippled to make mistakes, and so much of it is like they don't. One of the issues that I think, and some of the success that, or whatever you want to call it, the fact that I'm not homeless anymore by choice, is like, our profession teaches you, and training and coaching teaches you how to communicate well, right? Like, I think if you pay attention, like if you're like present when you're with people, it teaches you how to communicate well. And if you can communicate well in person, communicating well over the internet becomes exponentially easier, right? Like, even back in the day, like, and I've made this analogy a few times before, but apparently, and this is actually the crux of our first episode. If you haven't listened to it, do go back and listen to the first episode of RX Radio. But it's like, I remember in high school, maybe even grade school, like trying to talk to girls on MSN Messenger. Maybe were you an MSN guy or an AIM AOL?
I was an AIM, yeah.
Or ICQ or whatever the other one. But it's like, dude, you had to grow a set pretty quickly. Like you were in the slaughterhouse, and it's like you were online because you were online to talk. And if you got ghosted, it wasn't like a DM that went into message request. Like, she saw it and she ain't having it, bro. Like, so get over. And it's like, even that is so tame compared to getting rejected in person. But it's still like, I think once that shifted, like kids growing up now with, you know, like you can have a whole communication with someone just like double tapping, liking photos and nonsense like this, or to how I'm to understand Tinder. I don't have a background in it as far as like swiping left or right. It's like you never have to face that denial. You never have to face that rejection, and then you just learn really poor communication skills as a consequence of that, because real like objection and real confrontation and real like sort of denial in person scares the shit out of people. Like they say, it's an old saying, but I think it still reigns true, right? The biggest fear is public speaking and death is number two. And the Seinfeld joke is, if you're at a funeral, you'd rather be the one in the casket than the one giving the eulogy, right? And it's just like, I think if you can learn how to communicate well with one person, that skill starts to scale in front of more and more people. And then as you, like, I think this is going to sound like a weird statement, I think talking is thinking. Like when people say I'm thinking out loud, that's just thinking to me. Like I think of so much shit when we talk about training or when we talk about really anything, like the 15 minutes before we actually start the podcast, where me and you were just blowing out the lines so we don't say real heinous shit before the episode started, while the episode's on. But it's like, to me, thinking and talking and discussion is thinking. Like thinking in your head to me is usually like, I'm hungry. Like that's usually what I think in my head. If I want to think about like training concepts or even stuff I want to do and like weigh out pros and cons, writing would, I guess, classify somewhat to some degree as this, like getting a feedback, getting a reverb off of a surface that kind of tells you whether that surface is you reading your own words or looking at someone's face when you're describing a concept. So like usually when people come to me, and this is something I tell a lot of our level 1 coaches, and this is a great part I think about social media, is like, look, you might not be good at like the face to camera stuff, right? Like we've had some podcast guests on that are just like, maybe that's the first kick at the can. They don't really know how to have this sort of interactive dialogue with a medium, because essentially right now I'm just sitting in an Airbnb living room talking to myself. For all intents and purposes, as far as the neighbors are concerned, that's what I'm doing. But I think using social media as a means in which to practice, like dip your toe into the water. Like, okay, maybe you're not cool with face to camera stuff yet. Again, like this is, I promote a lot of our Prescript coaches to do this, because I know a lot of them, if you're going to be a good coach, you need to be a good communicator, and by an extension of that, a good educator, right? Because that should be your goal. It's like people try and make training so complicated that, you know, their clients to make their clients think that they couldn't possibly train without them. But I think the goal is to be such a good and effective communicator that your clients would never want to. Right? And I think that's a core tenet. That's what we lead off the first lecture of level 1 with, because it does get complicated. But I challenge them, like, look, if you need to synthesize your thoughts, you can use the vehicle of social media to begin the process of becoming a better communicator, right? Like whether it's writing captions as a start, whether it's maybe doing Instagram stories, like they're throwaways. Stories to me, and I still walk around like a kid with Asperger's, like doing 10 million things around the house with no shirt on while I'm answering questions. But it's like, I think it offers a platform to allow people to start to think, which I don't think people use it as that. It's like, guys, this is a silver screen. This is the red carpet. This is a stage for you to build confidence that when you do, and for the time being, before fucking Elon Musk neural links the shit all of our brains and we end up just like telepathically telling everyone what we think, followed quickly by the death of mankind. It's like, I think you should use this to your advantage and learn how to be a better communicator. Like, critique yourself, put it out there, take a risk, right? And it's such a marginal risk. Like, if you can't talk face to camera to a story, answering a pointed question from someone of a captive audience, like, they're following you and asking a question, like, they don't really care if you say, but it's like, if you pay attention to it, you go, okay, like, what am I going to say about this? Rather than sitting there and just like, so you can to a certain degree curate your experience, but it's a stepping stone towards the uncurated, unfiltered interpersonal communication that I think is the cornerstone of coaching. And I think it's such an underutilized, undervalued subset or facet of social media, and people just can't get the fuck out of their own way. Right? Because they didn't grow up in the ICQ days. They don't grow up getting ghosted by like the hot chick in the 7th grade. Feels weird saying that as a 30-year-old. So I'm just like, but when you're in the 7th grade, right? So it's just utilizing that as a tool and content creation, for better or for worse. I think it's such a good idea. Like, I've learned so many things, even in the evolution of the level 1 course. Like, if a coach took the level 1 course now, and I think we're 6 or 7 semesters into this, if I'm not mistaken, this November semester, which registration up live. If you guys are interested, do shoot us an email or a direct message. info@predescript.com. Registration closes, I want to say the 3rd week of November. Shameless plug, put it in there. But I just think, like, the level 1 has changed so much because I've had to think about these concepts over and over and refine and retool. And that's one of the reasons we haven't automated the course, is because it's like, especially with the content of it, it's contentious stuff. It's stuff that has to be changed. Like, there's some hard and fast rules of lifting that we could spin up and automate, and we have, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But I just think the biggest thing for a coach is, like, before you learn necessarily a particular thought process, like, learn how to communicate. And then, because like sometimes, like, you'll self-select for the audience that you want, right? Based off of the way that you speak, right? Because we get the smartest people in the world. Why? Because we rattle off a bunch of syllables, and people fuck with that, right? So I don't know. For me, it's like, if I were to give advice to anyone about really anything, it's just like, learn how to become a better communicator, but think of it as something that you need to practice.
Yeah. I think that's beautiful too, because what your job is as a coach is you're there basically to field questions. So, I know me personally, the type of person I am, if someone tells me what to do, my first question is why, or how to do something. My first question is why. So you need to be prepared for that. And you need to be able to effectively communicate what you're expecting of this person for them to have that buy-in, or to have them that sort of compliance. And if you don't have an idea of the reason that you're telling this person to do something, then that's a whole nother issue in itself.
Well, I think that becomes projection, right? Because, like, the people who demand that of others demand that of themselves, right? And the people who don't. So if you're a coach that just, like, someone tells you something and your first answer is why, you don't think about entering into a conversation where you're telling someone something and their answer might be why. I did a post about this the other day about the straw man versus the steel man. So these are, like, words that often get thrown around in, like, politics. So, like, building a straw man of your enemy is to only highlight the weakest points of his argument or of his character, depending on, like, the theater of competition that you're competing in. And it's like, you give yourself a false sense of confidence with your own skill set because you think your opponent is this straw man, right? Straw would be something that lacks, any sort of robustness or structural integrity, so he's easily overcome. Where it's like, I think you should do the opposite, right? And create a steel man. Sometimes I can create better arguments for an opposing thought process than the people who are standing across from me opposing it. Right. Then it's just, man, you're playing 4D chess, motherfucker. Like, this is, you're jumping queens they didn't even know they had. Right. Like, and I think that's where, like, you learn. Because I think if in that process of creating a steel man of your opposing thought process, you have to do away with part of your artillery that doesn't hold water, man. Like, if it's not going to be effective, it's got to go. And for me, like, I really learned this working in the Silicon Valley. I think the fact that you work where you work is actually such a unique, it's such a unique experience in communicating with people on the mass level. Because the people in the Silicon Valley, and I've been around, you're from PA, I'm from, like, the Midwest of Canada, you could say. But the people from the Silicon Valley, I think, are extremely unique in the concentration of a certain personality type that you're going to get. And it's people who've got to where they're at based off of what you said, right? The first thing out of their mouth is why.
Yep, absolutely. And that's the thing is even when we were first starting out with Prescript, we were doing a lot of remote work. You remember that when we were doing like remote programming? And if you want to really refine your communication skills, is work with people via email in the masses. Because what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to get to the bottom of an issue that is, being told to you through a subjective lens, and you have to do so in probably the most efficient way possible. So that's something that really started for me. And then, working in the Silicon Valley, it's literally, I just had this dude, his job, just like the artist, is reselling stuff on Amazon. Like that's the job now. And this, he's doing fine for himself. But when your mind works in that way where it's, I'm going to set up these systems to automate, so I just like post this stuff and it gives me money in my bank account, then you want to know, you're going to ask all these little questions. And just like a computer works in like, was it ones and zeros or fucking if then statements and all that shit. Yeah. All that stuff. Like that's how they think your body works. If this flexes my hip, how does it stabilize my lumbar? If this extends my hip, how does this rotate my hip? Like all this stuff. And so that's where, exactly, you build those steelman arguments, is because you can't just throw out a statement and just accept that they'll believe it, unless it's something that, you can argue through and through every single which way. Because, some of these people, they're just going to poke until it falls apart. So especially in this scenario where I'm sitting here face to face, I'm going to take your money before you leave here. I need to have some sort of merit to what I'm doing. And I need to, I feel like I like practicing the way I practice, and I purposely don't take people's money until they leave here, because I want to feel like there's a chip on my shoulder. I want to feel like I need to give this person this, certain experience before they leave my office, or I'm not deserving of their money. Or even like, I don't know. That's just how I think of all this stuff.
We're very different people. Y'all paying before I show the fuck up. Because it's funny. I remember actually.
I take your card info. Don't worry about that.
This is happening. But I remember the conversation where I was driving to Dublin in the East Bay when we had this conversation about the point of sale service that you use, and I was thinking about switching over. And it was one of the things that I asked you about, like, where do you have it set at? Like, it says you can have people pay before the visit or after, and you're like, after. And I'm like, nah. I followed everything else you told me to a T, and I was like, yeah, no. But yeah, it's true though, man. Like, I think, but at the end of the day, what you're communicating is actionable. It's proof, right? And that's what, like, I think that's kind of like the OG Denzel Washington move. It's not about what you know, right? It's about what you can prove. Right. And that's where I think, like, and this is again with the level 1 stuff, I don't want anyone to be an academic, man. I've been there, I've done that, then I chose the road of practitioner, because they're almost antithetical to one another in the similar way that, coaching and programmers are different than one another. It's like, you want to write a template or you want to have a coach? It's like, what's the difference? It's like, one's adaptive, one's malleable, one's reactive, one's proactive, one's creative, right? And the other just is what it is. And so I think, like, in the thought process of improving communication around, like, proving what you need to do, it's like, if someone, and you learn this, like, we've learned this both the hard way in dealing with business and partnerships and mergers and investors and all this stuff. It's like, if someone doesn't understand something, guess whose fault it is? Mm-hmm. It's fucking yours. Like, it's 100%. But we go into meetings and Clem is just so confused, and I sit there. I was like, oh yeah, because I haven't told her literally any of this stuff. And I was like, that was with the level 1 program. It's like, hey Clem, we're doing this, and she's like, what? I'm like, yeah, we got 3 weeks. We'll figure it out. And she's like, you've got to be fucking joking me. I'm like, yep, it's gonna happen. All right, this is more of an FYI call. See ya. And it's just like there was a lack of communication, and now, like, we talk on the phone every week, and then me and you and Glenn and Mark talk on the phone every week. But I think, in order to start to take a step out of your comfort zone, being able to, create something and verbalize and see the response and be willing to be open to the response. Like before, I used to say stuff and people didn't understand, and I was just like, oh God, fucking morons. And now it's just like, dude, you're such an idiot. Like, your job is to make sure that people understand this. That's why I tell the most ridiculous stories. Like, that's why I make the most ridiculous analogies of all time, because it's like, I need to make sure that people communicate in the same way lifting. I remember this back in the day. And this is something actually Dave Tate reiterated on a podcast I did with him, is like just understanding how people learn, number one, right? Like, if you're a coach and understanding like kinematic, visual and auditory learning styles and preferences, and how some of these might overlap for someone to be like, sensory auditory or kinematic sensory, totally change the way I approach teaching everyone every exercise. It's like, first time they do it, I'm going to step behind them. Why? Because if they're good and they don't go looking for me, then they're not visual. Then I'm just left with auditory and kinematic. So I just fucking sit there with a dowel and start tapping shit. If that doesn't help, then I don't do it. And then it's just all auditory, right? Or if I step behind them and they go look for me, it's like, okay, visual has to be a part of it, right? Let's see how they do without the dowel. Okay, they don't need poking at the knees or the hips to pay attention to shit. It's like, all right, what about auditory? It's like, I'll do a set where they don't do what I don't say anything and I'm just in front of them. I'll do a set with me in front of them and I'll start talking. And within 3 sets, I know how this client learns. I've been able to discern visual, auditory, and kinesthetic or kinematic learning preferences that will carry with for the rest of this client's entire training. It's not like they're going to be auditory, visual with squat and different with, no, like this is how they learn, right? Like this is going to be the same kid that like, visual kinesthetic learners, the kid who couldn't fucking sit down in math class, right? So you start to recognize things like this, and you start to actually learn how to curate the experience per the individual. And I think, people have an audience. They don't realize it. I mean, even if it's like 75 followers, like it's still people that are willing to hit a button and to scroll through and see what you're up to. Cater that, learn how to communicate, because for 75 people out there in your social media sphere, which is probably directly related at that point to your actual, your friend group and your real social, your human network, there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people in the world that would fit that criteria if you could get your message effectively across to them. So, in a day where like a lot of people, it's easy to trash on social, and it's not without its shortcomings, man, like believe you me, but at the same time, it's like, if you can create a ridiculous amount of value, you can be successful in doing whatever you're doing, right? Back to the artist, right? Mm-hmm. Like, Banksy is taking people's money and shredding their photos. Like, he's creating an insane amount of value out of thin air. And I think if you can do that, if that's your goal, which I think it should be anyone's goal in any business, is like, it starts with communication, right? It starts with being able to get your point across to other people and being able to identify, the barriers to that given the individual.
Yeah, that's great. I have a question for you. What is the biggest thing that you see shift in coaches in before and after they take the Prescript level 1?
Yeah, it's tough, man. Like, fuck. I would say I think it's confidence, because a lot of people come in and I don't think they're far off the mark. Like, I say things and I expand on things, I think, 3 to 4 dimensions deeper than what they probably heard in sound bites before. Because of course, right? Like, it's 16 weeks of me in your ear, plus lab sections during the week, plus the manuals coming out. So I think a lot of times people are, they've through trial and error stumbled across some of the concepts that we talk about, but we give them such a solid foundation in it that they feel confident in going out and starting a podcast, going out and starting training businesses. Like, I can think of, and whether I had anything to do with it, likely not. It was probably just we were a part of what they were doing and we're inevitably going to do, given the personality type of coach that reaches our doorstep. But I can think of 20, maybe more, 50 different people off the top of my head who came in, and then all of a sudden they took this advice. They became content creators. They were able to generate more revenue for their business. They were able to start a podcast. They were able to, start nutrition companies or training companies, collaborate with each other. I know a handful of guys that have gotten together across the world through the network of coaches that have gone through the program, just in like, forum chats and stuff, and collaborate on podcast efforts, or, someone hires coaches from within the platform because they know at least the base level of knowledge. So I think it's something like, hey man, you can say this and I got your back. Like, if you guys go out and like you think this way, here's why I think what we teach holds water, right? Like, there's that why again. And it's basically like what I want them to feel comfortable with is like, look, there's a lot of competing thought processes. Our end goal is to help people, not necessarily be right. Here's the empirical evidence. Here's the anecdotal evidence. Here's the personal evidence that builds up this evidence-based model for the things that we teach. And they have a network, like a gang of people that it's like, look, you know, some people are dicks on the internet. I get that. But it's like, if you say, you know, and we see a lot of, you know, the people try to process our course material through the creation of content, which is amazing. And then when they nail it, they feel a sense of like security in the fact that like, look, if someone wants to go, because this is a thing with communication. You know what happens when communication breaks down? You know what's next? The fucking fist. That's what's next. And it's like, if you're willing to take it to the mat, you can be the best fucking communicator in the world, right? Because you have a sense of confidence that it's like, oh, I'll explain this until I'm blue in the face. And then if it doesn't work, I'll kill you. Like, that's like the supreme confidence to have. So like, for me, it's like, look, like this is what and why I think, and like, this is what I passionately, I don't even believe, like, this is kind of how the body works as best we can tell, given, you know, our current stance right now. This is, and I try and give real life experience of athletes I've worked with, or patients I've worked with, or, you know, online clients or what have you. And I go, okay, like, here's why we think this, or here's why we think this to be true. And then when people begin to step outside, they realize that, look, Instagram, first and foremost, I don't think is full of the negativity that we think it might be. You have a supportive community of people who are going through and being challenged by their thought processes, who are backing you up. At the end of the day, it's like, look, this thing is my fucking baby. Like, if you come after this, you better look out, man. I'll go straight Papa Bear on someone's Instagram account if they start trashing someone. Because it's like, I mean, look, like, you're the same way, right? Like, from painting taints to fucking West Coast regionals to chiropractic college and undergrad and Silicon Valley practice and fucking, you know, Olympic weightlifting nationals. It's like, fuck with me. What are you going to bring to the table? Like, there's a certain level of like, if someone is going to, and whatever, you can critique whoever you want, but if I'm to take you seriously from a critique, you need to be more educated, better experienced, or stronger than me, because those are 3 pillars of evidence. If you're not bringing that to the table, son, take a seat, right? And it's like, I worked my ass off for 10 years plus, making sure that I had those bases covered, that I could go with my words only and go, here's why I think this, and no one with, you know, any sort of sense would come at me in a hostile way. And then if they did, it's like, all right, time to go. Let's step outside. Right. So it's just, I think that's honestly the biggest thing. It's like, there's a sense of community of people who take the course, likely because they pre-select around an audience that I think is open to higher levels of concepts, who aren't pigeonholed in their beliefs, who's willing to, like, a lot of times this is, some of the course material is like, this is what I think and why I think it, and it's not held up by all 3 pillars. So, hey, we need to be open to more evidence in this, because I read a paper that said this, I read another paper that contradicted, the methods of this study weren't great. Through my experience, I actually see that the conclusion based off of this one study is likely what's going on. Here's a potential mechanism as to why. You make your own decision, right? Like, one of the first things, again, that I say on day one is like, this course isn't meant to give you all the answers. It's meant to help you ask better questions. And I think it does that. And in doing that, people start to ask the questions through the medium of content creation, and it helps them think. You know, they're writing it down. They're actually having to think and synthesize, like me going 1,000,000 miles an hour and then, you know, rehashing in labs and trying to review in a way that solidifies. And you can see the formation of thought come to life in, you know, in a caption or an IGTV. And you see the progression of, like, you know, a single post with a picture being well received, to maybe like a swipe, to maybe an Instagram story post, to maybe an Instagram live, or an Instagram story, to an Instagram live, to an IGTV, to maybe like a YouTube video and podcast and website articles and so on. So yeah, I think that's been the biggest thing. That's been the coolest thing for me, is like, dude, I don't want this to just be us, like, because there'll be a day where and probably not that long from now, where me and you are going to be dead in the ground. So it's just like, I want this thing to be like a thing that lives on. And the way it does is through people who kind of take not just the content, but like the concepts of like, look, learn how to learn, think about how you think, share, be wrong, and then be better. And then just, I think everything will sort of spiral out. So I think as much as like core concepts that we can kind of see based off of how the course is laid out in 16 weeks, right, where the first half is like shoulder, hip, and spine, what we can call like functional anatomy and applied biomechanics is kind of buzzy, but that's probably the best way to describe it. And then taking the second half of the course is like, hey, let's now take a look at how these core principles of functional anatomy and applied biomechanics work when we go through and start to train the body in a way that most people are used to in resistance training circles. Like, let's look at each individual muscle and see how these overarching concepts of functional anatomy and applied biomechanics can be married with first principles of resistance training, and how these two things can coalesce to, better create, set up, stabilize, and execute exercise in a fashion that compounds to the positive. So that's really, like, for me, that's to see that played out week by week, and people getting that to spin people's wheels, and they go, oh, okay, like we learned about the serratus this week. I usually do my protraction planks in a neutral position, but now I'm going to do them with a slight external rotation, but I'm actually going to protract through, a full inhalation driving posterior expansion rather than driving my scaps into the floor. So like just little things like that, for example, that comes to mind is probably the biggest thing I see. By the end of 4 months, people feel a lot more confident in, communicating their value with other people on the internet, in person. Shout out Sam Hall in Australia. He's one that comes to mind. Ethos Strength. If you don't follow him, absolutely worth a follow. He's been doing some live seminars, and I've been told by those who attended that they're incredible. Just things like that. Again, likely on the trajectory, regardless of our intervention, but through the course of spending 4 months with someone, and everyone that takes the course, I follow as many people as I can. Like whenever they post up any of the lectures, I'm like, oh, okay, someone in the class, follow, and then just being able to see not only just like our stuff reenacted, but our stuff evolved and improved upon. Right? Like, you're putting it out there, man. Like, we almost have 1,000 coaches through the program. It's 1,000 different experiences, 1,000 different interpretations, 1,000 different personalities of people who take this, and it's evolved in 1,000 different ways. Everyone kind of takes it through the lens of their own experience, and then out the other side comes this finished product, this refined product that's something that, is of essence the principles we were talking about, but maybe played out in an arena that we never thought it could, right? Like different sports, the high life, field hockey, things that I have no familiarity with. People can take these first principles and cross apply them into different environments, because it's like we don't necessarily teach a system. It's just like, here's a systems way of thinking about the body. So long answer to a short question, but I think that's like for me been the biggest thing that I see develop through the coaches, is just like they continue on in their trajectory and gaining more confidence around disseminating information and building value behind their business.
Yeah, I would use the same exact word, confidence. And honestly, I think it just comes from a deeper understanding, because all this information, it's out there. If you want it, you can find it. But the thing that's special about the course is the way that it's tied together and the way that it makes sense, in a way that you can relate it and apply it in real life scenarios. So I think the real understanding of the course material is what gives people these confidence and gives them something tangible that they could take and they could put into practice, day in, day out with all their clients or whoever they're working with, their population they're working with.
Yeah, I always think of it like one of my favorite movies is Good Will Hunting, right? And he has that moment in the bar with the guy with like the Michael Bolton cologne and the dumb blonde ponytail, and he like starts to just go like book for book with him, and then he starts to predict where he's stealing these, and he actually, I think, directly cites to the page and paragraph where he pulls a certain reference from, and just accuses this guy of plagiarizing the book because he has such a crazy good memory. And he's like, look, like, you paid fucking however many hundreds of thousands of dollars for your education. It's like, I got mine for $1.37 in late fees at the local library. I feel like to a large degree, and we have clinicians that go through it. We have some amazing clinicians that go through it who've gone like the clinical route. But I think in a lot of ways, it's like, look, here's how to navigate the information that's out there. Like, if you're a coach and you've been a coach, but like the idea of like, doing another 4 years in grad school, or 4-year undergrad, 4-year grad school is just like not in the cards, doesn't mean that you're not like privy to the information, right? Like I think a lot of, you know, and for better or for worse, I think because we self-select so well and because we make sure that the resources are available to grasp these higher level concepts, like I think if the goal is to raise the industry standard, man, like you have to let the industry in, right? You can't leave it this fucking Ivy League, you know, old boys club of like people with master's degrees that have just been focusing on one thing their entire life. It's like, you know what those people usually suck at? Communicating, right? Because they're in fucking mice or like in petri dishes doing God knows what, chopping pineal glands out of fucking rats and injecting their brains with shit. It's like, that's not going to help you in real life application. So yeah, I think it's like, you know, we've gone through the ringers professionally, personally, academically, and I think to come out the other side of it and go like, man, thank God for chiropractic college letting us in. Because it's like, I literally remember my interview with Greg Snow. You know how it went? It'll tell you what, if you can beat me in arm wrestling, I'll let you in. And I was like, thank fucking God that was Chiro school. Could you imagine going to fucking, I say hand to God, but could you imagine going to, I don't know, showing up to Stanford and sitting down with like the vice provo or like the fucking dean of the MBA, the MBA school, and just going like, what do you say? What do you say? Best 2 out of 3? Huh? Not like, no. But I think
is
like,
that a true story? Did he actually say that?
Hand to God, bro. Hand to God. I remember walking into the bookstore after I got accepted to buy some things. I remember Dr. Allen, the guy with the cool glasses.
Yeah.
I didn't know he was a professor there. And what did he say? He's something real dumb and like bro-y, because he was kind of like a bigger dude. You could tell he was like jacked at one point. He had kids, and like I liked him. I'm on the record if he's listening. He's not listening. But he was like, so I just had that. Like, so I just had like, and you got to understand, people who don't know Snow, paint taint. People who don't know Snow looks like Bob Saget.
Yeah,
like,
he fucking does.
There was 2 professors at our school that were brothers. One was like the fucking dean, which was Greg, and the other one was Scott, I think, if I got that right.
Yeah.
And they couldn't be more, like, Scott was like, you catch Scott after a class, he'd tell you about like some orgy he was at the weekend. He'd be rolling around on the ground doing interpretive dance with like chicks. Like, Scott's a guy when you meet him, you go, I bet you this guy fucks for like days on end. Like, he's one of those kind of guys. Like, burns some incense. Like think of Hansel. Like, I always think of Hansel when I think of when I think of Bro Snow, I always think of Hansel. Like, these are like weird orgies with midgets and like Sherpas and stuff. Like, that's so. But anyways, the older Snow, they're gonna listen to this, and I'm so getting my fucking diploma removed. But the older Snow is very, very professional, very straight laced. Does look like Bob Saget. Super nice. Like, all things aside, Snow's an OG. Like, he holds it down. But yeah, like, so I sat across this guy with like, you know, a very nice pressed collared shirt, tie combination, tailored pants, and he just put his elbow up on the table and wanted to arm wrestle me. So, but it's like, I learned so much from chiropractic college that likely someone of my academic persuasion probably shouldn't have. It was only the fact that I saw it a means to an end to improve my training that I really did it. I was like, I bet you I could get bigger if I did this. It was like, oh, cool. Like, they got dead bodies. I'll probably get super jacked. But no, like, and I think it's, you know, with the decentralization of education, I think it's like, it's only because there was a ton of shit that I'll never fucking use ever. People don't realize this, that, and we talked about this before in the podcast. We had a course that required us to stick our finger up a plastic asshole. Right. You tried to forget that and bury that in your memory. You can't forget that during GIGU, you had to do the old like a one in the back door. I don't use that very often anymore. But like, but there's so much stuff that like I didn't use, but it's like, all right, can we just distill out what I think is the applicable stuff that is worth knowing, and can we improve on it? There's stuff that I learned in chiropractic college, and I was like, yeah, no, that's not a thing. There's no way. What year is this? Are you serious? What is this, like Back to the Future? There's no way this is still being taught. So yeah, that was kind of the impetus of the course. It was like, how could we put all this together and actually raise the standard of the fitness industry? And now it's evolving, man. Like, now it's, you know, we have the level 1 course. Killian has his skill acquisition coming out in January, and you have the barbell course, which for me would be, and I'm really glad the way we shot the barbell course. Because right now the level 1 exists just live, just me. Manual's coming out early next year. Probably by the end of this semester, we'll have it ready for all students, past and present. But with the tangible skill of Olympic weightlifting, the fact that we have the barbell weightlifting course coming up in December that is shot in a way that is like, it's tutorial driven. There's a barbell in your hand. It's something that you can access and recall on once you've gone through the course. I think is just like in the weight room, the medium has to fit the message, right? Where like a lot of what we talk about in level 1 exists in deeper theory and challenges practical application. Where it's like the weightlifting course, I think because it is more teetered to the side of practical application, the fact that people have this now as a resource forever once they take it, I think is such a valuable thing. And it'll be our first course like this. What's your thought process? Not only like, teaching Olympic weightlifting in person is hard enough, but what's the thought process in creating prescript weightlifting when it comes to how can I scale a means in which to teach proficiency in coaching and also execution of not just the snatch and clean and jerk, but also their progressions, regressions, adaptations, and optimization.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of takes it back to how I got into Olympic weightlifting and how the majority of people that are in the sport have been introduced to it currently, at least in America. And they're learning weightlifting from CrossFit. And the CrossFit method, a lot of times, I'm not going to, generalize for everyone, but it's just kind of do it and we'll make it better along the way. So they're, like you said, they're starting with specificity. They're starting with, this is a snatch. Do a snatch and we'll try and make your snatch better after, you learn the snatch. But that's not necessarily, it's not most effectively taught that way. So basically my line of thinking as I created this course and the way that it's regimented, the way that it's designed is all about how basically I wish I was taught Olympic weightlifting with the knowledge that I have about the sport, about the human body, about just movement in general right now with all of my experiences. I put that into what I found is the most effective and efficient way to both teach and learn the snatch, the clean, and the jerk. And what a lot of that comes down to is for most people, it might not look like, taking it back to probably the first statement you made in this podcast was that it's not about specificity at first, right? A lot of times what you're doing on day 1 looks nothing like competition day. And that's the idea, is that we're building this piece by piece, position by position, movement pattern by movement pattern. And what this all starts with is just creating stable positions. So most people, their biggest limiting factor in the snatch or the jerk or even the clean is going to be getting into some of these more difficult positions, being able to stay structurally stable and create force in those, maybe end ranges of shoulder movement or, getting into enough thoracic extension to be able to support a barbell overhead. So as we're looking at it, it really starts off with just the basics. The first, we'll go through some assessments and some for hip and shoulder and that stuff. The first thing that we do in the course is we learn how to body weight squat. If you don't know how to squat and you can't control, your hips or your core bracing as you're squatting just with your own body weight, there's absolutely no way you should be putting a barbell over your head. So it really starts from, building up every single piece of the movement pattern, and it gives you processes along the way where you can apply these things where if you are not able to, do a snatch grip push press, then go back to start. This is where you're going to bow out and we're going to work on thoracic extension, shoulder external rotation, and, maybe a kettlebell bottom under press or something like that. So it gives pathways in which you can attain these things if you're not at, the place where you can support a barbell overhead or you can't maintain balance in the bottom of a front squat. It shows the process of how to get into these positions before we load these positions. And then it's a progressive, a progression through weightlifting. The way I always think about these movements, especially the more complex movements, the things that we do, we need to get into positions first. And then once we have positions, we need to be able to move from one position to the next while maintaining, balance, tension in the right areas, and have some sort of intention in movement from point A to point B. And then after we can maintain positions, we know the intention behind the position, we're able to move from one position to the next. Then we can start to add some speed and add some load after that. But it really comes down to just knowing first off, knowing the positions we need to be in, knowing, again, it comes back to why we need to be in those positions, what we're trying to accomplish from that. So you not only understand what you should be doing with your body, but why you should be doing these things and how it lends to the overall goal of, being able to snatch a competition or being able to clean, being able to jerk. So that's my way of thinking is, most of the people we'll send to the Olympics this year, they got into weightlifting through CrossFit. So that even then they probably, of course, they've met better coaches along the way and they've been able to, make better movement patterns. But most people that are going to get exposed to weightlifting, it's going to be without a coach. And even if it is with the coach, it's not an Olympic level coach. So in my mind, it's something that is bringing higher quality coaching on how to learn the snatch and the clean and jerk and kind of the prerequisites to being able to snatch and clean and jerk to the masses.
I think prerequisite systems centered around answering the why is the cornerstone. Like if I had to describe the barbell course, if I had to describe the level 1 course, if I had to describe, and now the weightlifting course, I think that's the unique thing about, because I think it's completely derived from the way we think we learn or the way we've known ourselves to learn best. And it's just, give me something tangible and that creates buy-in. And then if superimposed on this tangible thing that creates buy-in and confidence in the system is a system or a system's way of thinking that actually yields results, then you're cooking with gas. You know what I mean? Like you have an ability to instill confidence in this process because you have an ability to communicate effectively the efficacy of the process itself, right? Like the prerequisite system, I think, is something that's so overlooked when we look to teach quality movement. And I think that's something that it's an argument I get into all the time. And it's just this idea that, like, look, people are coaching is turned into programming, and in the subtle shift of hand, and we get away from practitioner to academic, we take the quality and we transition or try and translate that into quantity. And what makes a good athlete is an intangible qualification that they're able to possess, built off of, achieving these prerequisite milestones. And I think furthermore, understanding why these milestones are necessary. Right. And I think if I had to come up with an equation on how to teach something, I think that would be it. Right? Like you can't just come up with an arbitrary set of steps. It has to be deeper than that. You have to say, like, look, and also highlight the responsibility of, look, hitting these steps does not necessarily give you licensure to be able to nail with high quality these next positions. It just gives you the green light. What you do behind the wheel is up to you. Like the technique fairy isn't going to come under your bed, right? Like you have to be present. You have to be kind of in the moment. You have to execute with the intent of high quality in mind. But you'll put in enough thought process for that intent of high quality in mind to itself be unconscious and mindless, which in the flow state of any athlete, I think, is what we're all after. And the reason an athlete can get into that position and turn their mind off is because they've created an autopilot system. And I think fundamentally rooted in the confidence of these positions as it pertains to weightlifting is a deep understanding of the why these positions were necessary. So yeah, I think it's a super unique way to look at just education in general, especially when it comes to, like, physical education, as it were, in the sense that, look, we're trying to bring education to a mass audience that's not limited by a geographical bottleneck. And so far, with the level 1 and the barbell course, we've been able to reach 30 something, maybe more countries. Like once someone from the Ivory Coast signed up, and I was like, okay, this is a different thing. So I think, like, just a little bit of insight as to, like, what goes into the thought process in designing this course would be something that better helps self-select. Because if people hear it and go, oh, like, I want to learn weightlifting, and I fuck with this idea of, like, this is how I think I learn as well, then we want to self-select for good results, right? Like we want to self-select for people who are going to take the course, become better lifters as a consequence, and become better coaches as a consequence of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been awesome to see the impact of it so far. So I'm excited to put this barbell course out there, and see what kind of feedback we get, see the results.
Yeah, so December 14th is coming out. So I know we did a lot of talking about the education today. So Prescript weightlifting comes out December 14th. And it's going to be totally automated. Take at your own pace. Don't have to tune into weekly lectures. So it is more conducive for those kind of all over the world. And it's going to be something that you will have access to dripped on a week-to-week basis with assessments to make sure that you're on track. We also have labs. Lab sections are something that we've kind of sampled from the conventional university model that allows for discussion. So as long as you're enrolled in the program, for the time you are enrolled, you can go into a lab and you can ask questions regarding some of the material, some of the progressions, even case studies is something that the labs have been really useful for. So we can have this sort of meta learning that happens with everyone that comes in. One person has a particular anomaly in their lift or a lifter, and now all of a sudden all 15 coaches in the lab become better as a consequence of that. So I think that's been a lot of fun, not only just for continuing education, but also in improving networks and making those connections with other like-minded coaches around the world. So December 14th, Prescript weightlifting. If you want to get on the wait list, do go over to prescript.com, pre-script.com, and put your name on the wait list and be the first to know. For the level 1 course, the level 1 course is set to begin the last week of November. Signups end, if I'm not mistaken, signups will end the 21st of November with PSL 1 winter semester 2020 starting likely on the 24th with our first live lecture going live, usually in the evening, but we'll have more details for that when and if you sign up. So guys, that's what's kind of coming for us. A lot more stuff now that we're kind of anchored or I'm anchored in one place and we're kind of doing this more consistently. So if you guys ever have any feedback or you guys have any questions about anything we're doing or anything we want to do, we do have, I want to say 4 to 5 different courses in different stages of development at the moment, which is super exciting. So, if you guys have been listening since Jump Street, if there's things that you want us to expand on, we're obviously more than happy to talk about stuff on the podcast. But if it's something that could be spun out, do you think that could help people and aligns with kind of how we think, do let us know. But as far as our time goes for today, guys, I do appreciate you tuning in. Junta, any last words before we say sayonara for the week?
Thanks for listening, guys. I appreciate it.
All right, guys, we'll see you next week.